Hello, friends, and welcome to the Friday Conversation. Hope you all had a great week, and thank you for joining us today again. I have another guest that I'm very excited about. Jane, I've seen some of your previous interviews when I saw your name pop up, and I found myself watching all of them. I thought I better stop watching these because I want to be kind of going, not knowing everything about you. But can you give us an introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. The main thing that I've written is a book called Screens and the Ego, a meditation on Gen Z. And my interest in serious writing and literature started in college. I studied comparative literature in Arabic.
Hmm.
And, when you read books, most of the time you're connecting your emotions and engaging empathy with the character, and then as the character grows and changes and comes across critical observations about life, you hopefully can have a more expanded understanding of how you would behave in situations, or how other people are interpreting events in your life, right? So, comparative literature focuses on literature that's not English. And my interest in Arabic literature really came from that desire to read books that are as distant from my own personal experiences as possible, so that I can choose, so that as you get greater and greater gaps of a human experience, you come to have to realize the similarities and differences between human experiences across culture and through time. And also, in addition to that, I am technically of Arab heritage, but I
Hmm.
never grew up speaking Arabic. So I was just kind of interested in that in college, and I learned how to do that really well. And I was really, really good at interpreting literature when I was in college, and I thought that I was going to go get a PhD, but unfortunately, I just wasn't able to establish the types of relationships and really integrate into the culture at the institution that I was in.
Hmm.
So I didn't end up getting a PhD. And even though that was super difficult for me for a little while, I realized that the fact that sorry, if you hear a dog barking,
You're
it's because a
fine.
dog's barking. Um, I realized that by being a freelance writer, I had total freedom,
Hmm.
and I could shut up the editor's voice in my head that was like, no, this isn't good, this isn't whatever, and I could just write. And it produced some really authentic work that most people feel empowered when they read. So now I'm getting an MFA in creative writing at WVU, so that's super exciting. And other than that, I'm just interested in. Oh, I should tell you another thing. During COVID, I couldn't find a job, right? I was trying to figure things out. I wasn't going to get a PhD. I started working in the Amazon warehouse with my budding career. And then I transitioned to working in a facility for teenage female wards of the state whose behavior was too extreme for foster care placement. And at the same time, I was also going to therapy, and I had a series of interactions with people that were incredibly dysfunctional in both my family and my friends. And I was kind of aware of the fact that if every single relationship around you collapses at the same time, it's probably a you problem and not a them problem.
Hmm.
But I couldn't really figure out what the common problem was in my own behavior that was causing all of these issues. So I went to therapy, and the therapist didn't help me. And at the same time, I was working at this facility for teenage female wards of the state, whose mental health was just completely difficult. So they also had access to therapy every single day. Every single day at the facility, we would do activities where it was name 10 things that you like about yourself that isn't related to your appearance or
Hmm.
whatever. And given the amount of mental health resources that were available to these girls, I saw such little improvement. So a lot of Screens and the Ego talks about psychology in terms of criticizing the fact that so many people are suffering from mental health problems. And yet, in a world where we have had more access to therapy than any previous time in history in any culture. We also have the highest rate of mental health issues.
Hmm.
So that necessarily means that like the mental health establishment doesn't have a good control over people's mental health. So that's the spicy hot take that I bring.
Wow.
Back to you.
That's quite a hot tip, but I think it's true. I mean, it because I remember even when I was younger. I mean, I'm not ancient or anything, but I remember 20 years ago when if you use the term mental health, you'd get laughed at in most places, and people wouldn't really take you very seriously. But now it seems like it's taken seriously, or at least it's people take it. If you say, "Look, I need to take a break from my mental health, or I need to step away from this project for my mental health," it seems to be better received. It's becoming more accepted. But why is it that so many people are suffering? And there's, like you said, there's so many resources. That's a great pitch for the book.
Yeah, yeah, and my book talks a lot about it. I do agree with you that one of the best things about like having psychology integrated into like just cultural consciousness has been that people are more sensitive to mental health,
Mhm.
and are more aware of the fact that people have mental health problems. So being able to talk about it is probably a good outcome. But the fact that there are so many people who are suffering from mental illness and the resources available to them, as evidenced by the number of people who are suffering, are not helping them. Like if you have a 46% of a population, which is the rate of mental health problems in Gen Z, 46% of
Wow.
a population is suffering from this issue, then the treatments that you are providing them preclude like success. Like they're not working. And we
Right.
know that because the rate is so high. And the main thing that I would say to that is there's a difference between really really severe mental health problems and like general depression and anxiety. Also, the vocabulary that you have available to you informs your understanding of what's going on, right?
Right.
So if you say, so before people had access to words like mental emotional health or depression or anxiety, people were still feeling feelings of sadness or loneliness or grief, but their context of their own internal life revolved around religion mostly. And if they were talking about what's going on inside of them, they would mostly talk about their soul.
Mm.
And soul is different from mental emotional health because mental emotional health is medical, whereas soul has this idea that you have to behave according to a set of ethics, and your adherence to that set of ethics will orient your soul and uh, create a right relationship with God, as opposed to ignoring a set of ethics and then having a wrong relationship with God.
Mm.
And in substitute for a word like depression, someone might say grief. They might say that they feel shame and they feel guilt or grief. And those words, like the implication of feeling shame is that like you've done something and it and it's caused problems with your community, or
Right.
guilt is like you've done something and it causes problems with God. And I think that the rise of depression and anxiety has corresponded with the complete rupture of religious understanding. I don't think that people talk about guilt and shame nearly as much as they used to. So.
Mm. For someone who is suffering, who is, or even just who is depressed, or who's is going through
Mhm,
a rough time in their lives, and they aren't religious,
mhm.
and they depend on the medical side. But is it important to have another aspect of, or like to at least have a sense of soul, or a sense of not necessarily religion, but just like kind of looking internally and not just on medically, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think that it is. I think that people think that science is absolutely true, and therefore any consciousness about the way that they interact with the world, if interpreted through a scientific lens, must be true. And Yeah. Let me say it this way, okay? Like, I think that Americans don't really, sometimes you'll hear Americans say, we don't have a culture, right? Or I don't really know what American culture is. And that is because that's not because America doesn't have a culture. It's because American culture is so dominant in our own psychology that we think that what we believe about humans is universal to all humans, and that's not necessarily true, right? So, for example, in like my grandma's way of thinking about things, or like in pretty much, I wouldn't say the entire Middle East, but of the stories that I've had access to in the Middle East, generally you have the adults being the good guys and the kids being the bad guys in whatever story you're telling, right? So, my grandma had a moment where she was growing up where where she was in a classroom, right? And she had lived with the consciousness that adults are good guys and kids are bad guys. And she was in the classroom, and her teacher had like sat in some green paint and had a giant stain on the seat of her pants. And my grandma was horrified and super embarrassed for the teacher. And then she noticed that other kids around the room were laughing for some reason. And she kept looking around the room to see what could be so funny because she couldn't connect that that's what they were laughing about, even though she had noticed those things, right? So cultural consciousness is, and an American who's never been exposed to culture outside of that wouldn't even
Hmm.
understand that that could be the type of break that a person could have, right? So, and also like talking about the human internal experience is like probably the least scientific thing. Like your emotions are not measurable, right? Like science is based on repeatability. Like if I can measure it, if I can repeat it, then it's a scientific principle, right? But human emotions are very difficult to measure, and they like situation to situation they can differ greatly. So, what I would say to someone who's operating in like a modern secular liberal context who feels sadness and they don't really know why, and they've been to therapy and it hasn't worked, I would say that that is because you are adhering to a very specific, very unusual way of thinking about your own internal life, and that the reason that you are talking about mental emotional health is because Freud had a profound impact on Western society at the exact same time that religion collapsed in Western society. And if you were talking to your ancestors 100 years before, they wouldn't be able to articulate like they wouldn't agree that happiness is the goal of life. And you can see that in like 18th century novels. Like how often does like I don't even know. I guess Jane Eyre would be a 19th century novel, but even still, like how often does Jane Eyre say that she's content versus how often does she say that she's joyful? She uses the word content, right?
Hmm.
So she's not even living her life with the expectation of happiness. That's the way that most, Western people's ancestors
Hmm.
lived for a very long time. So the expectation that you should be happy, the belief that if you are not happy, something is medically wrong with you, as opposed to like maybe you haven't, like, maybe your emotions are telling you that there's something wrong with your life that's like tangible and immediate. Like maybe you should, reestablish a relationship with your family or friends or whatever you need to do. Like maybe there's something that is actionable that you can do.
Hmm.
And then my final thing about it is that psychoanalysis, I actually really like Freud. I know that a lot of people don't like Freud. I do, but I do think that the way that Freud has just integrated into modern consciousness has been really problematic, because a lot of therapy, it takes an adult patient that has problems and then helps that adult patient trace all of their problems to their early childhood experiences. That's just the main thing that it does. Like, oh, like you were angry at your coworker? Tell me about how your father was angry. Yeah, and then you just go back and back and back, right? And the thing is that that's not actionable, right?
Mm,
Like you don't trace all of your problems to your like parents and then like have anything to do after that. You've just um like perverted your own sense. Well, perverted, like a lot of people get really angry at their family even if their family's a good family because of psychoanalysis. Like that's a really like major problem that I've seen personally. But even more than that, even if your family is responsible for your problems, like how does that help you? Like what can you do about it as an adult? What are the things as an adult that you can think about so that you stop whatever negative behaviors? How can you control what you can control? Like people for 1,000 years were telling their kids, don't focus on the past. You can't change the past, focus on the future. And then psychoanalysis was like, hey, let's spend $150 twice a week focusing on your past, which you cannot change. So,
yeah, I never
yeah.
really thought of it that way, but you're right.
Mhm.
What is it about Freud and during that time of the collapse that you had mentioned?
Mhm.
What is are there specific things he that he was studying or that he in his findings that you feel are particularly responsible for that shift?
Yeah, so Freud contributed a lot. One, he contributed he popularized the idea of talk therapy, right? So before then, uh, people obviously interacted with people who were mentally unstable, but the idea that you could talk to them and fix it was something that was not really in cultural consciousness before Freud. He developed the idea of the unconscious or the subconscious. So the idea that your dreams can be interpreted kind of like literature is interpreted with symbols, and
Mm,
that the symbols mean something about your life and yourself. That was really big. And then he just kind of liberated people from Victorian sexuality, which was good because Victorian sexuality was really repressive, and people who repress any one aspect of their being that far tend to have psychosis because they have to compensate for it in other areas. So his popularity was pretty explosive because he
mm,
exposed a lot of corruption in terms of like people's mental states when they're sexually repressed. So all of those things were good, but he also popularized the idea that human beings' emotions can be understood scientifically. And Freud never measured anything, right? So he wrote and wrote and wrote, but he didn't have a way to measure
mm,
his clients' emotions except like asking them to declare how good they felt at the beginning or the end of their session, right? Which is basically how we're measuring people's emotions now. We just give them survey after survey after survey, asking them how good they feel on a scale from 1 to 10 or whatever. And it's still really difficult for people. Like self response surveys are just not that good.
yeah.
People change how they feel. Maybe one person experiences the exact same emotion that another person is experiencing, but they declare it on the scale to be different. And the the general idea of psyche logos or soul logic has opened up a pretty big field for people to just get rid of basic tenets of moral teaching in life that has sustained human civilization for literally 4,000 years.
Mm.
So,
Wow. I just never realized he had such an impact. I mean, he's I hear him mentioned a lot, but I just have never heard that in that context of
yeah.
how impactful his work was and his
Yeah,
yeah.
it was huge. It was really, really huge. Him and Carl Jung, and I mean, I'm talking about Freud in just one person, but also I'm
Mm,
talking about Freud as like a movement because there are very few psychologists who didn't at some point get exposed to Freud's ideas. Carl Jung took it even further. Yeah, in terms of literary consciousness, like a lot of our ideas come from books that we don't really give credit to. I
Hmm.
recently read Treasure Island.
Oh,
Have you,
wow.
by the Scottish guy? Have you ever read that?
It's been a long time.
Okay. So like I read an analysis online that like nobody had ever romanticized the concept of pirates before this author. I don't remember his name. He's a Scottish author, and he wrote Treasure Island, right? So originally beforehand it was like talking about a pirate was like talking about a car thief or a burglar or whatever. It doesn't there's nothing romantic about it. But then Treasure Island came along, and the idea of the peg leg, the idea of searching for buried treasure, the idea of the parrot, the eye patch, all of that, like every stereotype that you associate with pirates comes from one book, like one book. So it's just interesting how profoundly impactful
Hmm.
certain pieces of work that like only people who are like nerds like me and you who like read books that
Yeah.
go into the past will know that is his name Robert something
Robert Louis Stevenson.
thank you,
Yeah.
Robert Louis
I had to
Stevenson.
look it up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't get talked about very often, but his book had a profound impact on how we think about pirates today. So that's in that way, uh, Freud is profoundly impactful.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that someone can write a book like Treasure Island, or I'm sure we could think of a few other examples that completely change the way we view, profoundly change the way we view certain things, and not only in one culture, but it's just it's wild that one book or one movie or one something can just change so much for
Yeah,
generations.
yeah, it's crazy. It really is.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
wild.
and it shows you the power of like the power of cultural consciousness because people who are living in cultures that didn't experience Robert Louis Stevenson probably don't have those same thoughts about pirates.
Hmm. Makes you wonder how we would view pirates now without that, if that book
Yeah.
was never written. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
We probably wouldn't. We probably would view them as like boat thieves.
Yeah,
Like
that's
I've
kind
never
of
really thought of a boat thief.
that's kind of what they were, right? They're kind of
Yeah.
not very nice people. Uh, yeah, one of the questions I've wanted to ask you about, just for because I think it's an interesting question, and for myself, I have to admit. But
Yeah.
one of the questions was how do you heal when how do you heal from when people hurt you? And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with is healing and truly healing, because I think sometimes we can, when we have a good day and we think I'm feeling good today, and then the next day it's like you feel back to where you were, and some of it is forgiving yourself or just kind of letting things go. So
Hmm.
what are some steps that someone can take to start that momentum?
Yeah. Yeah, so these aren't my thoughts. These are like the tenets of the Abrahamic faiths.
Right.
And then once we talk about them, then we can talk about Eastern faiths. But step one, realize that your worth is not based on how other people treat you. It's based on how you treat other people.
Hmm.
So you, like, regardless of the material circumstances of your life, you are responsible for the way that you act and the way that you treat other people, given the situation that you are in. And as long as you treat other people with kindness and graciousness, and you don't lie, and you're a respectful and courteous person, then you have pleased God and your soul is right with God. And God doesn't care how pretty you are. He doesn't care how much money you've made. He doesn't care how many likes you got on Facebook. He cares about the like
It's
count
true.
was a real
Yeah.
problem for me.
Yeah.
I had a real addiction to Instagram, but that's an aside. So the Abrahamic faiths say focus on the moral, on focus on right action, focus on the moral impact of your decisions, and orient your entire life around making good decisions. And as long as you are focused on that, then you have worth because you have pleased God. right? So that gives a person total agency, regardless of the material circumstances of their life. And it also gives them a a gauge of understanding how good they are or how bad they are. That's very tangible. I think that a lot of times when people try to do modern therapy, they're like, okay, let's look in the mirror and say, I am beautiful, I am smart, I am good enough. And then they feel good for an hour, but it's not really lasting. And I think the reason it's not lasting is because it's not real in the way that, like, saying, hey, I can really respect myself like I would respect another person because I am a respectable person. And I know that I'm a respectable person because the sum total of my actions in life have caused other people to have better lives, right? So that's kind of the way that I would orient that. Islam has a much more like good deed versus bad deed weighing of the scales type thinking about this. Christianity basically says that if you are with Jesus, then you would behave this way. But which is which is lot more difficult for, like, I don't know, for me to understand ontologically. But either way, it's like you are right with God because of your actions. And then the way that my understanding of Lao Tzu and Buddhism uh, feel better about the fact that there's great suffering to life is they accept that there is suffering to life and they distance themselves from it, right? So on the one hand, I am a person in this world. This is how I would frame the ontological relationship between a person who practices Buddhism and the world, right? Their job is to create distance between their own impulse to ego, so that they can be at one with the spirit of all things. So, like, you can operate from the world thinking that, I'm going to be great. You can't do that if you're really into Buddhism. What you can say is, I I understand that my eating food is taking food away from someone else who wants it. And I understand that ultimately, if I grow these crops for the purpose of feeding people, then I'm not growing these crops for the purpose of feeding cows or feeding horses. So the grand total of life is the fact that all things live and die. And as I separate from my own ego and my own will to live, I come closer and closer to the will of all things and the balance of nature. I think that that's a little bit harder to wrap your mind around because it's basically like a continuous ego death. But that's the two ways I would go about doing it. And both are rooted in humility, right? They're not rooted. The idea of self-esteem is often uh like, okay, so if someone has really good self-esteem, then they can like make fun of themselves, right? But a lot of times people don't understand that, and then they think of self-esteem as the like opposite of humility, and then they walk around with aggrandized egos. So
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
true.
yeah,
It's something you mentioned earlier about. I'm fascinated with social media and it effect on our mental health and just general well being. But you mentioned about likes and Instagram, and it's are you seeing that it's having an effect from your experiences and people you've worked with? Is it what have you
yeah.
seen?
Yeah, I had a clinical addiction to social media for a long time, and it absolutely wrecked me. I got about one third the likes as the other girls who I knew in college got. I got between 130 and 150, and most of the people who were in my social circles were pulling 400 likes. And it destroyed me mentally. I was constantly focused on taking good pictures. I was constantly focused on curating the image of having friends, and instead of like spending time with my friends talking to them, I would focus on taking pictures because because I had a public scoreboard of how popular I was,
Mhm.
and I could imagine every night having 100 girls in a room and having 70 picked before me to like hang out or to go on a date with or something.
Mhm.
And it was really terrible. The like count destroyed me. I don't think that all people respond to social media as badly as I did. But I really, I deleted social media about a year after COVID while we were still kind of quarantining, but kind of not. And I really have to treat social media like recovering alcoholic treats like his old bar.
Yeah.
Like I can't. I wrote a book and like they wanted me to create some social media accounts to promote it, and I just couldn't because I would be tempted to write stuff or I would look like. Also another thing, uh I've never looked at someone else's accomplishment on social media and felt happy for them. I've always, always looked at someone else's accomplishment and been like, oh God, why didn't I do that? What's so different? Is that person really that much smarter than me? Like, what's the essential difference between me and her? Like, why would she get that and then I didn't? And I I just don't do that when other people tell me good things in their lives, like when I'm talking to them. Like if someone says like, "Hey, I got into a really good school," most of the time when I'm talking to people face to face, I'm like, "Hey, I'm really happy for you."
Mhm.
But I don't know why. Like, I don't really know what the essential difference between in-person and online interaction is. But I do know for me that I've never like been a good person or felt happy for someone when I've interacted with them on social media. So that's my confession.
No, I think it's a serious issue. I think it is an addiction. It can become an addiction, and do you have to treat it like something like alcohol or
Yep.
another any other nicotine or any other drug?
Yeah.
No, it's a serious issue, and I think people are starting to realize or starting to wake up to more to it now.
Hmm.
And I do see a movement of even younger generations moving away from, they're getting more to journaling and writing letters to their friends instead of writing an email, or sending a DM or something. So I think I hope that the counterculture will become not using social media, and that will become the cool thing to do, is what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a serious issue for sure.
Mhm. Definitely. Um, what has your experience on social media been like?
I used it a lot to promote because I have a YouTube channel too, but I used it a lot to promote, and I found myself doom scrolling a lot,
Mm.
and I tried to not do it, and I mean, these platforms are engineered to get our attention, to keep us scrolling, and we become
Mhm.
I forget the quote about being a product. If you're not earning, you're the product, or I forget what the exact quote was, but you're just
Mhm.
like a battery in the matrix is what you are. I mean, it's you're earning the platform's money. You're selling yourself to the platform, and they're gathering your data, your information. They're using your photos or your contacts or your text
Yeah.
messages. It's wild, the access they have to us, and for what? I mean, does it really bring us together? Does it really make us happy? I mean,
Right.
I guess when you see the like count and you have a high like count that day, like, oh, that feels pretty good. But when you have a not so high like count, it doesn't feel too good. So
Right.
it's tough. It's a real issue.
Yeah, it is. And then also, even if you do have a high like count, and you feel good about yourself, that still sets you up for uh, low self-esteem because having an inflated ego, well, so if you respect yourself because of how like other people treat you, then the moment that you're in a situation where people are not like treating you well, you will think that you are no longer a good person. And people are so scared of that that they will sometimes do anything to fit in. And that's kind of like the main way that peer pressure like develops. It's also like just like a personality type. Like I used to, God, I hate thinking of this example. someone who I used to date was like a social comedian well into his like 20s. And it's because the idea of being rejected was so terrible, because there's nothing else once you're rejected, you know,
Mm,
like it's if you don't know yourself outside of other people liking you, then you will never really know yourself, which is a scary thing. And you see that in influencers a lot. Like the women who pull 50,000 likes per post are almost always just standing in front of plants, like with makeup on their face. Like
yeah.
those are the Instagram accounts. They're like, "Oh, I was in front of a window today. I was in front of a plant today." Like it's so inoffensive. It's like, do you like Katy Perry?
Not
Or
particularly.
kind of
No, I mean she's
not
fine. I
particular?
don't dislike her, but but
Exactly, exactly. That's the exact thing about Katy Perry. I feel like she's not really in control of her music. She's just kind of like got pushed to be a pop singer, right? And her music is so inoffensive that everyone kind of likes her, but no one is really a fan of her. And that's the way that you get a lot of success on social media. You become Katy Perry. And I don't mean to be mean to Katy Perry. I'm sure that she's a very deep person, like outside of the music that she's producing. But the sorry,
that
that
was
sounded meaner than I meant it to be. I'm sorry.
that's true though. That's true. So it's funny because it's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, so yeah, I've moved away from social media and just the podcast now is mostly what my attention is. And but yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's a problem. And now what I really worry about is young women, especially with deep fakes and AI and the things that are happening now in schools. And I feel like I'm a man yelling at the cloud, but it's a there's been a few cases. I forget where it was. There's been a few cases of classmates passing around AI generated
Nude.
pornographic images of classmates, and
Right.
that must be horrific. I mean, to be a
Yeah.
15, 16-year old girl and just or really anybody, but particularly it's such a really difficult time anyway with going through those changes. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. The capacity for bullying is pretty it's a lot bigger now, right? Like
oh yeah,
even so, there were girls who were interested in having sex or whatever. Maybe they had a boyfriend and maybe they sent a nude, maybe someone created the nude. And then like their school or their classroom would know about it, but it wouldn't be like stuck on the internet forever. The permanence of the internet is something that's so contrary to humanity. Like one of the main things that human beings have always lived in is the fact that they are born and they are going to die, and that their lifespan is infinitesimally small compared to the like full span of time that exists, right? And that's really understanding your own death and understanding how small you are in comparison to the world is the basis of human freedom.
Hmm.
And I'd like to go into that for a second, and then
Yeah,
we'll take it back to pornographic stuff.
sure.
So there are 8 billion people on this planet. If you tried to count to the number 8 billion, it would take you more than 500 years, right? Like if you sat in a room with 1, 2, 3, 4, it would take you 500 years to count to 8 billion. And that's how many people are on this planet. And every single one of these people has memories they hate and people they love and dreams they want to accomplish. And all of them want to be remembered, and all of them will be forgotten. All of them. So we don't know, just as we like, so that's just like one planet, right? And then there's like trillions of planets in the solar system. So by an argument of the volume of space in the universe, you are so infinitesimally small that you cannot matter according to anything material. And that same thing is true for time. We don't know the biggest, baddest dinosaurs of the Triassic era, right? Even like we know that they existed, but there will come a time that we don't know that they have existed. We don't know like what life was like before whatever, like arachnids or something. not arachnids, the little the shelly things that like
Oh,
crawl to the bottom of the ocean.
yeah, I forget. The little, yeah, I forget
Yeah,
the
yeah, the
crustaceans.
crustacean.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right. Some
That's-
prehistoric creatures, right?
yeah.
So there's prehistoric creatures. So if you're like me and you're a layperson, your entire memory is going to be wiped out within 4 generations. And if you do something that causes people to remember you for a longer period of time, which honestly is mostly negative, like people most of the time don't remember heartwarming stories, but let's pretend like you are like Alexander the Great. There will come a time that the entire memory of Alexander the Great is forgotten, and the stories of the age of man are forgotten, and every mountain is leveled, and no one will care. Because time is so much longer than us, than humanity. So, like, the petty stuff that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis does not matter in terms of space or time. It just doesn't by an argument of volume. Therefore, you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, like, what does life matter at all? Like, why, why does this? Why are we here, right? And the answer that the Abrahamic faiths provide is that, or the answer that I would say is that anything that you have that's outside of space and time is what matters, right? And human beings kind of feel this moral impulse. And it's not socially constructed, right? Because you have disagreed with what someone taught you about what is good or bad before, right? Like if the human moral impulse was just taught is just taught, then no one would ever disagree with their society's moral impulse. And people do all the time because they feel it inside, right?
Mhm.
And if you know how you want to be treated, well, let me say it this way. Turkeys are very, very violent, and they will kill a member of their flock that's injured in order to get rid of predators and not attract predators. And a turkey literally will claw to death his own mother for the sake of not attracting predators, but no one would say that a turkey is being immoral
Mhm.
because that turkey is behaving according to nature. It's behaving according to its nature, right? So turkeys are allowed to do that, but human beings just can't do that, right? Like there's something different about a human being killing their mother. Like they can do it, but when they do it, they have violated something that is very profoundly human, right? A human can't kill their mother without violating a law or a thing that is central to the human experience. And that is what I would call the moral impulse. It's kind of the main thing of philosophy. There are some people who believe that human beings don't have the moral impulse. And then I would ask them, okay, well, have you ever been treated badly in your life? If you don't believe in the moral impulse, then how can you ever say that someone mistreated you? But that moral impulse exists outside of time and outside of space. And that is why the Abrahamic faiths have considered that moral impulse the God connection or the thing that God gave to humans specifically, or the thing that made us human when we ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Like that's kind of the fundamental thing that distinguishes humans from the animal realm. So yeah, taking this back to nudes. Um,
Yeah, that's yeah.
yeah, so taking this back to nudes, the idea of being small is the thing that used to ground us in our central understanding of our purpose of life and our connection to God.
Mhm.
And now humans think of themselves as very big because the internet is infinite. So we think that if we put ourselves on the internet, then we too will be infinite.
Hmm.
And it makes sense that people who have access to the internet don't have that same like grounding of God connection that our ancestors did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I like how you brought that full circle because I never kind of put that together.
Yeah. What
Well,
do you think? Do you agree, or what do you think about it?
yeah, I think I don't think I don't think as humans we're wired to take so much input all the time, to have the opinions of hundreds or thousands of people constantly, or to have, whether it is about ourselves or about whatever world event happened, or whether it's down the street or wherever, just to have so many opinions constantly, and just so much
Mhm.
information. I don't think we don't have time, or I don't think most people feel like they have time to just sit and reflect and just turn everything off and just kind of reflect and just decompress. And I
Mhm.
don't think a lot of people, I don't think many people do that, and I don't think they necessarily want to, because I think they just want to scroll because it
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's very difficult for people to decompress when they're using social media. I also think that a lot of times people will use social media to decompress, but they'll never feel a sense of relief,
hmm.
right? So, um, I have some relatives who are really into Matt Walsh right now. I'm not sure if
Matt
you've
Walsh.
seen that.
The name sounds
He's like
familiar.
he's a Daily Wire guy, and he's
Oh,
super
the beard
controversial.
guy, the bearded guy.
Yes,
Okay.
that guy. So I have some relatives that are interested in him, and the main thing that they get from listening to him is not his politics, but a sense of courage to like be okay with being criticized. And it's like it's a way for them to like reclaim their manliness, because they're like, okay, well, what I said is true, so it doesn't matter if it hurts your feelings or not, or whatever it is, right? So so their obsession with this one character is not based in any of the information they're getting, but based on the personality feed that they get when they watch him. Um, and that yeah, and that's kind of like a decompression, or like they're
Hmm.
kind of like recharging when they watch him. And I think that people who are really good influencers understand that that's what they're giving to their audience. Like people don't watch a influencer because they like the content. They watch it because they like the influencer most of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the issue comes from the fact that, okay, now this person, instead of recharging according to religious traditions, as human beings have done for thousands of years, they're doing that recharging by listening to a person who has an agenda or a political thing to add into the mix, and then they like control people's consciousness,
Hmm.
and then people are like, and then you get the political divisiveness that we see now, which is where like both sides are like so withdrawn from the other side that they're like, how could you possibly think that way? Like the only reason you could disagree with me is because you don't think that other human beings deserve rights.
Yeah.
And then you get that. So yeah, I think that scrolling can be substituted for decompression, and then people don't ever actually decompress.
Yeah, I can see that. I Yeah, I think some people. Yeah, I can see. I know people who scroll to kind of unwind from the day, from their stressful work day, and just, I'm just going to see what's on Instagram today, and no big deal. But yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's hopefully things will change, but I don't know. I'm not too hopeful, but we'll see.
What do you think? If you were to give advice to someone who was a little bit more secular and was suffering from anxiety or depression, what would you say to them?
I think finding, it's so hard now to find people to connect with, to find a group, or people who are in a similar situation, who are looking for a companionship, or looking for a friend, or just looking for someone to. I think most people just want to be heard. I think just to listen, just someone to truly listen, and just to take it in, and not even necessarily to offer advice, or just to listen, and just
Mhm.
to be there for so. But it's so hard to find that now, because everyone's so isolated, which sounds strange, because they tell us we're more connected than we've ever been, but it's hard to find people and form those genuine connections. So it's tough to find someone. Just sometimes it's hard just to find a good friend just to talk to. So, but
Yeah.
I think that's what's helped me. Just having someone just to say, hey, I'm here to listen if you need it. Just someone even to offer, even if I don't take them up on it. It's nice to know that they're there.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Um, in addition to that, if someone was having trouble making friends or having trouble sustaining meaningful relationships, I can actually give some advice on
Hmm.
that because I had to figure this out. Um, if you want to make a relationship with someone and then they do something embarrassing, say like a story of a time that you did something similarly embarrassing. That's my advice to you. Um, if you I was talking to one of my friends and she had gotten dental work done, and half of her mouth was paralyzed.
Hmm.
And I'm currently pregnant right now, so I've been having a lot of food cravings. And I told her about the time that I had half of my mouth numbed, and then I like had an overwhelming urge to eat as much food as possible, and I ended up stuffing a tuna sandwich in my mouth while half of it was numb. It was really attractive. It was probably like my best moment. But it made her feel so much better. It made her feel so much better. It's that's the type of thing that like being able to make fun of yourself is a really good way to make other people feel listened to. Another way to make people feel listened is so like my grandma while she was dying really didn't want to stay at a gross hotel. And I was a little bit annoyed because we had made a reservation at a hotel that was clearly gross. But I said to her, she was like, "No, I can't stay here. I can't stay here. I don't care. Let's just leave." And I was really, really annoyed, and I wanted to fight to stay there. But then, what I decided to do was say, "Yeah, you don't like it when it smells like cigarettes?" And she was like, no. And it was super funny. Like, I chose to understand and just like state her opinion back to her. And it moves the conversation really, really quickly.
Hmm.
And it really helps in terms of making the people around you feel listened to, and then they'll listen to you in return. So that's my advice.
It's wonderful advice. The time absolutely flew by, so I know we're getting
Yes.
close to our hour. I just want to ask you a quick question that I try to ask all my guests, and that is, what was your first job, and what did you learn from that experience?
My first job was at Big Salad. It was like Subway, but for salads. And I worked with a kid from my high school named Hamza, who was in my Latin class with me. And he mostly prepared the food while I cleaned the bowls because I was a more junior employee. Um, and what did I learn from that experience? Besides Latin, um, I
It's pretty good.
right? It is really good. Um, you know what I learned? I learned that that in order to be part of a team, you just have to do what no one else wants to do. That's what I'd say. Like sometimes you just have to like be okay with making the sacrifice. I haven't thought about Big Salad in a long time.
I come with the hard hitting questions, I guess. Yeah, big salad. But thank you so much. I know you've had a busy day, so thank you for making time for me. And
Yeah.
for anyone wanting to get in touch with you, where's the best place to find you?
My website, janemarieauret.com. Link in the description.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also send me an email. It's on my website. I really only do email or the contact form. So my email is oraystudios@protonmail.com. And I
Awesome.
look forward to hearing from you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, and hope to do it again soon. I think there's a ton of topics that we could have gone on for hours and hours, but
Yeah, I'd
it's a
love
great
to.
time. Yeah, it's a great time. So thanks again, and we'll hopefully talk very soon.
Yes, thank you.